How we doing? Sorry, everybody. I'm just trying to set some stuff up real quick. All right, boom. Okay, we've got some people watching. Moonbug and Christina Challenor. Okay, I'm going to update the thumbnail. I've done my favorite thing in the world to do, which is, you know, like make a thumbnail before I recorded the video. So it looks, you know, I mean, it's fun, whatever, anyway. So save, okay. Right. So, everybody. Yes, hello Moon, hello Christina Chancellor. Hello Moon, hello Wishing Star. Hello, hello, wherever you are. All right, everybody. So it's as you can tell, it's a hot day today again. You know, like a kind of sticky hot day. I do wish. Okay, we need to move this here. Let's be a little bit less ridiculous about this. Okay, so all right, we're going to jump into it pretty quick. Basically, there is somebody who has made a response to me. Not to pry, but you sound like you're from the southeast. Do I? Do I? Yeah, I am. Yeah, I can even give you the county. Dare I? Ooh, I don't know. Okay, you know what? I'll say I'm in the Beds, Bucks, Hearts area. So is that useful? I'm in the 3 counties. So that's that. Three counties represent. I don't know. I don't even know if there's like other places that consider themselves to be the 3 counties, but I know that Beds, Hearts, Bucks is at least one contender for the 3 counties. Anyway, so yeah, basically, somebody has made a response to me. Oh, by the way, actually, can I? I say, I was wondering. I don't think it's an option yet because I think I still have like an extra thing I need to do. Yeah, I'm wondering whether or not I've enabled super chats. Like, you know, not to put. I don't think I have yet. No, I don't think they're an option. I mean, I can't see them, but can. I mean, yeah, like I said, I don't want to like be like, hey everybody. Oh, so super chats work. Oh, that's interesting. Well, okay, I will make no. I will have no expectation that that new capacity that I've introduced will be tested. But there we go. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I feel like I think I still have to verify it at least on some level though. So whatever. Anyway, just something to be aware of if you're interested. So apart from that, yeah, basically this person's made a response to me. They're called the Ephrommentator. Ephrommentator? Ephrommentator. Like commentator, but instead of com, it's Ephro. Anyway, so they're a very small channel. They have, well, I mean, you know, that's not me like taking shots of them or anything like that. It's just me saying they're a small channel, so you haven't heard of them, but they did a response, so I'm going to check it out. I will say, because I want to say this preemptively, based on the fact that they are a smaller channel than me. I think there's a certain dynamic where, like, if you're a small channel, you basically might as well respond for literally as long as you can and keep it going for as long as you can. Like, for example, if ContraPoints responded to me, then obviously I'm going to hit back. And then if ContraPoints responds to me again, I'm still going to hit back because it's like there will be no reason for me not to respond back to a bigger channel. Whereas, of course, the flip side is, of course, ContraPoints eventually is going to be like, well, why would I keep responding to this person who, you know, is much smaller than me? I'd just be, you know, growing their channel. And yeah, so I wanted to say that just to be clear, that the chances are this will be the only thing I say. Like, I'll go through the video, I'll give my thoughts on it, and then I'm going to draw a line under it. I would perhaps imagine that Ephrommentator will kind of offer up their own responses to my responses, and that's fine. But I just want to say now that I'm realistically not going to respond to it. I say this because there was another channel that was smaller than mine called Sentient Darkness, and they responded to me, and then I responded to them, and then they made a 3-hour, give or take, response video to me. And I'm not judging somebody for making a 3-hour video, because, obviously that's, if the video warrants a 3-hour response, it warrants a 3-hour response. But obviously, there is no point in me just constantly responding to them, because they're a smaller channel. They have every reason to keep responding to me, because of course that's how YouTube works. And I don't begrudge this person responding to me. In fact, I would dare say that I want them to kind of do well on YouTube, because I think anybody who has a passion for YouTube, it's a it's something worth doing. It's if they enjoy it and they're good at it, then I hope they do well. So let's see. All right, we're going to jump into it pretty much now, because I have no idea how long it'll take to respond, but I do know that I want to get it all done in one stream. So absolutely every reason to try and get it done quick. So the video is called. Oh wait, sorry. Let me just fiddle with the browser. So I just need to. How do I do it? It's blending. All right, there we go. So yeah, the video is called "Overthrow King Critical Commentary." I don't think you guys can see the title, but that's what it's called. So we're gonna start watching. See how it goes. All right. I must admit, even though I think my position is pretty solid, I can't help but get a little bit nervous. I just write, sorry, I need to sort this out. This is why it's been screwed up. It's way too, because this is obviously from when we were doing the reactions to the articles, and I had to crop it. Yeah, even though I'm quite happy with my position, I think it's a pretty good position, I still get a bit nervous knowing I'm going to be responded to directly. So let's see how this works out. All right, everyone, boom.
A couple of videos back, I did a one-shot.
Let me know, as it's kind of going. I'm just going to kind of fiddle with the volume as we go along. So I'm sorry if the volume's not perfect at first, but just let me know. It sounds loud in my ear right now, so I'm kind of expecting you might report back that it is indeed loud, but let's see.
On a fellow named King Critical, a turf YouTuber who primarily does response videos.
Oh, I want to say, sorry, so the comment there was, I did a one-shot, I think was the term, and I want to say I've seen that. Okay, yes, it's loud, people are saying, so we're going to turn it, I'll turn it down a little bit, and then let me know if it's still too loud once I play it again. But yeah, basically, it was, what one-shot means in this context is a very kind of just quick response to one point, and I've watched the video. It was a response to something I said about one of the K.T. Montgomery comics. I am honestly admitting I can't even remember what it was, but I have seen it, and I would say it was an okay response. I don't really feel like addressing it directly, but yeah, just so you know, if you were wondering what the context was, this person saying I did a one-shot on King Critical, it basically means they did a video that was about 2 minutes or so, where I made a particular claim in the K.T. Montgomery video, and they said, nah, you know what, actually, I might just see if I can find out what it was, because it was something to do with this, I made a let's see if I can find it. So, oh yeah, it was about The Simpsons. Sorry, I remember what it was. I remember what it was now, and yeah, it wasn't in my opinion, a particularly important point. Basically, I made an analogy. Well, essentially, the only point I was making is that sometimes you might want to, if somebody you know is involved in a cult, you might want to restrict their access to information coming from that cult and restrict their communication with people in that cult. So I was basically making the point of, sometimes the best way to fight somebody being in a cult might be behavior that is in its own right controlling. And then this person responded saying, no, that's not true, actually. The best way to help someone who's in a cult is to give them access to all the information, which, might be true. But like I said, I just don't think it's a particularly important point. So maybe they're right, but yeah.
Videos to transgender allies. Naturally, I've been wanting to go after this guy for a while. After all, not only do I love debunking transphobes, but apparently he's the king of transphobes. If I can debunk him, I could probably debunk anybody.
I would like to say, just for record, obviously, I would not say that like I would not sign off on that claim of like if you can debunk me, then you can debunk anyone, because obviously I'm not suggesting I'm the least debunkable person. I should also just really quickly say for the record, the reason I'm called King Critical is because my channel name used to be King Off which basically came from the fact that I happened to be reading the Silmarillion at the time, and I was just like, oh, I need to come up with a name, and I was like, oh, King Off and therefore that later on became just King, because I, the Alpharazon thing, I was just like, oh, whatever. And then eventually I started committing to making gender critical content, and then I became King Critical. Yeah, every now and then I get people who, like, think that the use of the word king is quite magnanimous, but whatever.
However, there was one thing that's been stopping me. You see, King Critical's videos are incredibly long, improvised, live stream commentaries with very little editing. And considering many of the videos he goes after are also quite long, or he just has a lot to say about them, this means that, well, look at the time lengths of some of these.
I will say I will give credit to this person for clearly recognizing, I think in somewhat good faith, why it is that I do the content I do. I mean, they point out that the videos that I respond to are quite long, and also the claim that I might have a lot to say about them, which is definitely true. So yeah, I just want to give some credit there. Like, it's not as if the person's saying, this person makes really long videos because he's obsessed or whatever else, which I do get. Like, I get comments saying, this person's made so many videos that are so long that in itself is bad, the kind of long bad rhetoric. Whereas this person just seems to be saying, well, just because of the particular types of videos I make and the people I respond to, the videos are long.
The only way I could really cover them is by trimming out so much that there wouldn't really be a point in covering them.
I would agree, this guy seems like he would have some like talent for voice acting. He's got a very kind of performative voice.
However, there's one video of his that does not fall under this category, but still has essentially all of his normal talking points, and it also just so happens to be his most popular video. And that video is refuting ContraPoints in 17 minutes.
Okay, that's a fun choice. I don't know, yeah, I've not seen the Polar Express. But yeah, basically, I'll also say, by the way, that, obviously, usually I try to avoid using kind of pronouns people would disagree with, just because, I mean, well, for several reasons. But generally, in the case of where I can only assume what pronouns the person would go by based on what information is immediately available to me, my assumption would be that this is a biological male, and there is no indication this person identifies as trans. Therefore, I will probably, on occasion, say he or him or whatever else, in which case, whatever. But yeah, that's kind of always been my rule. If somebody specifically says they don't want to be referred to by certain pronouns, I avoid referring to them by certain pronouns, just because that's a decision I've kind of made in terms of how I'm going to address people. I like to think it makes things come across as less antagonistic, but yeah, obviously, if I have no way of knowing what pronouns someone would like to be referred to, then perhaps I am accidentally being antagonistic, and I just want to say that. But it's interesting this person has chosen this video, refuting ContraPoints in 17 minutes, and the reason why is because this is the exact kind of content which I want to start doing now. So I guess maybe people are kind of picking up. I've pretty much decided that the lightly edited videos have become pointless. Like, it's completely pointless to do a live stream, which is, say, 2 hours, and then a lightly edited version of the live stream, which is, maybe only slightly less in length. So of course I'm still sitting on the kind of final two parts of the Kalen Conrad response, which I've edited, and they will go up, and they will be the last two videos I will probably ever do that will take the format of being a lightly edited video response. Going forward, my plan is to basically do these live streams, and then after that, and this video, this refuting ContraPoints in 17 minutes, is exactly the video I was thinking of something I want to kind of repeat, which is summarizing the main points in a scripted way as quickly as I can. So actually trying to make time efficiency a priority. Because when I'm, kind of doing the live streams and things like that, I would rather, sacrifice time efficiency to stress a point or make a point that I really think needs to be made. But obviously, it would be good to have some moments where I really do stress time efficiency. So there we go. This is kind of interesting because this is the kind of videos, or these are the kind of videos I want to do going forward. I will say that I think if this person really wanted to find something a bit more kind of truncated, shorter, and kind of more organized, they also could have responded to my like topical videos. I think a really good video like that I would be interested in hearing somebody respond to is my video How Gender Identity Lies About Reality. But I have some kind of similar videos. Hello, Leica. I'm not going to respond to the chat too much just because I want to, kind of get through it.
J.K. Rowling. Response! And considering he's attempting to respond to a 90-minute, incredibly dense video in just 17, this can only go so well.
And I bring...
Well, I mean, bear in mind, like literally my top priority in that video, I think, was to just get the most substantial points Contra made. And I basically did that video because, if everyone remembers, I made part 1, and I think I got about 10 minutes through, and obviously then realized, oh wait, assuming I have assuming it remains consistent, which it might well not, especially considering that the intro is likely to have fewer substantial points, there is a very realistic possibility this could run to 9 parts or even more. So I kind of realized what I need to do is watch it all the way through and just write down every single kind of significant point made. But yeah, let's see.
Bring this up because I want to give you a sense of how this kind of
Yeah, so yeah, I would also disagree the ContraPoints video was dense. Like, I mean, are any of ContraPoints' videos dense? And obviously, I mean, when I say dense, I don't mean, I mean kind of in the sense of being like argument. Because Contra has a lot of skits and, kind of fluff. And I'm not necessarily saying that as an insult. It's just, Contra's production. It's not like concise video essay format. It's, hey, here's a little skit about, me bathing in a bath full of milk or something.
Transphobe talks when they're not afraid of Twitter backlash.
There's something... Oh no, it's Kingception. Okay. Oh, I want to get rid of the thing here that like shows, because we're not going to be speeding up. Okay. I'm going to really struggle to hear myself talking, but okay, let's do this. I cut my hair recently, by the way. I mean, today. Because last live stream I was complaining about having a sweaty neck. Okay. Very unsavory about reframing silence as duplicitousness when said silence often comes from a place of fear. It's quite the power move to bully women into being afraid to speak openly about their beliefs, and then attacking them as dishonest when they speak differently in private compared to in public. Okay, I would say I would agree with that, and I expect I'm going to agree with everything I said here, because I really thought through everything I said, so let's see.
Those curious, here's what Contra was bringing up.
The foundational TERF text is feminist professor Janice Raymond's 1979 book, The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the Male, in which Raymond argues that, quote,
all transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves.
She claims that trans women are agents of the patriarchy who, quote,
merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women.
This book set the general tone for feminist transphobia, and I bring this up because I want to give you a sense of how this kind of transphobe talks when they're not afraid of Twitter backlash.
To begin with, Raymond wasn't speaking in private, she was writing these thoughts in a book that she then published and sold. Oh, also, Contra isn't accusing TERFs of being duplicitous. She's accusing them of euphemizing their beliefs in hopes of making them more palatable to the general population, which are entirely different claims. I just want to point out, by the way, that the things women are being bullied out of saying include, but are not limited to, calling trans women she-males and saying they rape women's bodies. You'd think the trans rights movement would start by bullying women out of calling them men, considering that's the central tenet of transphobia, but I guess not. Women's bodies. You'd think the trans rights movement would start by bullying women out of calling them men, considering that's the central tenet of transphobia, but I guess not.
I'm not really sure what that last point is supposed to be saying, because the trans movement does bully women into calling trans-identified males women. Like, I mean, I guess the point's supposed to be made, well, in the specific context of what Raymond was saying, Raymond wasn't explicitly in that exact paragraph calling trans-identified males men. But okay, so yeah, there was a lot to kind of break down. I guess I want to try and phrase the, I guess, criticism as charitably as I can, which I guess was basically just saying that I was not speaking directly to the context of the Janice Raymond quote. And there is a very obvious reason why I did that, because essentially, yeah, what ContraPoints was saying, when you break down, I don't think it's wrong to generalize a point. I think it's actually quite useful to generalize a point. When Contra is saying what this type of transphobe says, I mean, there you go. Like literally in the use of that word, this type of transphobe, that is Contra generalizing the point. So it's kind of fair for me to generalize the point in response to that, and assume that the general point Contra is making is that gender critical feminists will say things that are worse when they realize that they're not going to get some kind of backlash, which is basically the point. And of course, obviously, I made the analogy of saying something in private, whereas the specific example was Janice Raymond having written back before Twitter existed. But it's basically the same thing either way. It's that I guess Raymond was more comfortable living in a pre-social media age. Of course, you wouldn't have been able to conceive of the fact she was in a pre-social media age, but expressing her points kind of, out there. And of course, in the same way, the gender critical movement are, when they're in private, more comfortable talking about talking about their opinions kind of openly. And then the contrast to that is when you have social media, where there can be a huge backlash, where there can be misogynistic hate mobs attacking women, they're going to be a bit more reserved in what they say. So I feel like my point pretty much stands, right? That, of course, what you have here is women who might be on Twitter talking slightly, in slightly kind of more guarded language. And that is because of the fact that there is a potential misogynistic hate mob out there that could attack them for anything they say, or anything they say that's perceived to be egregiously wrong. So I feel like that kind of aspect remained. I mean, yeah, I don't think that really has been disputed because, like I say, ContraPoints generalized the matter by saying these types of transphobes. So yeah, I in turn generalized the matter by assuming that we're not just talking specifically about Janice Raymond having written a book, 50 years ago now. We're talking about gender critical feminists in general and how gender critical feminists might talk differently on Twitter or in kind of, public social media spaces than how they would talk in other contexts. I mean, the thing is, it's also obvious that like what Contra is saying is just a bit dumb, like in another sense, which is it's like the fact that Janice Raymond said one particular thing in a book doesn't really give us any indication of how the thousands and realistically probably millions, but maybe it's just talking about kind of public kind of gender critical people talking, let's just say thousands of gender critical people might talk in different contexts. You can't just say, well, Janice Raymond said this in a book, therefore this is exactly how every single gender critical person would conceive of trans-identified people if they didn't have social media to worry about. That just seems like a pretty, not very well made point by Contra, which, I realize this is just me just kind of taking another shot at Contra, but whatever. So the final point I guess I wanted to address is the claim of, well, what Janice Raymond said there is egregiously wrong. So where's the issue? And again, I would point out first of all that the issue, we're kind of talking about things being generalized. It's not just what Janice Raymond said. It seems like what Contra is trying to say by saying these sort of transphobes is the reality of what lots of gender critical women are saying, and therefore I'm going to point to the fact that what a lot of gender critical feminists are actually saying is quite reasonable. Now, having said that, I don't really think what Janice Raymond said was that unreasonable. You had, I'm getting, imagine how much better debates about gender could go if Twitter things. Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing. Twitter's obviously rubbish. And I mean, Contra should know that, right? Because Contra got cancelled on Twitter. But essentially, yeah, I just wanted to really quickly say, like, the two things were calling women she-males, which, as far as I know, like, I'm not really, and, you know, I would confess a degree of ignorance here, I'm not sure exactly how established it had been in the 1970s that referring to, you know, trans-identified individuals as she-males was viewed to be wrong. Like, because obviously that is a term, and, you know, obviously, to an extent, the appropriateness of certain terms has evolved over time. But either way, well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main point. So yeah, I'm not sure if anybody knows whether or not it was wildly inappropriate at the time to use that particular language. But either way, it is worth noting that it's just a word you don't like. Like, that's not actually a statement. It's not like an actual claim. It's just the use of a particular word, which is whatever. But apart from that, and yeah, I mean, even then, I'll say, like, it's not the most, like, as far as I know, it's not the most offensive word. Like, if I heard somebody say she-male, I would think, okay, that's like a bit of an outdated term. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's like a horrendously offensive term. The other point made was, where was I? That I realized, by the way, that I'm totally playing. I know the point was like, these videos are kind of unedited and improvised, and I'm exactly doing that now, but it's mostly because I was trying to, like, respond to the whole thing holistically, so I'm kind of putting it together in my head. Yeah, the final point was basically the point of the existence, or the kind of behavior of trans, you know, let's say post-op trans-identified males is akin to sexual assault, basically. I try to avoid using the R word because I think YouTube can be weird about that, although admittedly I have just played a video where that word was used, so I'm probably not doing much to, you know, actually achieve anything by not saying it, but whatever. I'm going to avoid saying it. With that said, I mean, I think basically what you have there is somebody using that particular word in a kind of metaphorical and poetic way to communicate what they perceive to be a kind of an offense to women. And the thing is, again, like, the problem is people do that all the time. I mean, it's literally like the famous speech from Ian Malcolm. What you call discovery, I call of the natural world. Like, people use that kind of language all the time in a kind of poetic, metaphorical way. And obviously, Janice Raymond isn't literally saying that a biological male who goes through sexual transition is, or, you know, kind of goes through that kind of surgery, is sexually assaulting women. Obviously, that's not literally true, but it's just a kind of metaphorical, poetic way. And with that said, you'd have to ask, is it appropriate to use that kind of metaphorical language to describe that thing? And I think specifically what Janice Raymond is getting at there is the idea of men possessing women's bodies. And in that very sense, there is a pretty obvious kind of parallel there. Like, they're both about men possessing women's bodies. One, of course, by men possessing other women's bodies via sexual assault, and the other is men possessing women's bodies by trying to emulate women's bodies through surgery. Now, again, are they both the same amount of wrong? Is that even a valid thing to criticize about, that kind of surgery? That's a discussion to be had. But I will say, I don't think it's right to suggest that, or appropriate to suggest that it's a good thing that people wouldn't even be allowed to talk with that kind of language. Like, if somebody says that, I mean, you can disagree with them and you can make an argument. And I would perhaps easily, I would be open to being convinced that Janice Raymond is being inappropriate by using that kind of language, and it is a bit of an inaccurate analogy to make. But I don't actually see any benefit to Janice Raymond having been bullied out of making that statement in, some kind of hypothetical scenario. So yeah, with all of that said, boom. Okay, sorry. We'll see. Yeah, like I say, I was kind of trying to respond to the whole point holistically, but we'll see if things get a little bit easier to kind of respond to piece by piece.
General note. Okay, so sometimes Contra will talk generally about a topic, so in that case, rather than playing everything said, I'll just flash up that general note message. So throughout the video, Contra frequently implies the gender-critical position is bigoted by drawing circumstantial and superficial parallels to other movements. For example, pointing out that gender-critical people wish to achieve their goals incrementally and then saying, that's just like what anti-abortion people do.
I would agree with that.
And like the anti-abortion movement, they recognize it's not yet politically practical to completely make illegal a medical procedure they don't like. So they settle for making it as difficult as possible to get one.
Okay, even according to the clip you played, you misrepresented what Contra said. She wasn't just merely comparing the fact that the anti-abortion crowd and the anti-transgender crowd are incrementalists, but was more specifically making the point that the reason why they're incrementalists is because their ideas are currently not palatable to a large amount of the population. There's a fundamental difference between being an incrementalist because you endorse such radical change that you understand society as a whole cannot be reconstructed overnight, and being an incrementalist because your ideas are so widely unpopular that you know incrementalism is the only thing that you're ever going to get political success-wise.
Obviously,
Okay, that's true, but I would say that doesn't really affect my point. Like, okay, in that case, it's not just comparing or drawing an analogy and parallel between the anti-abortion movement and the gender-critical movement based on the fact they're incrementalists. It's also drawing a parallel in that they're unpopular. But again, my kind of point still stands. I think this is a disingenuous effort by Contra to be like, hey, look, the gender-critical movement is just like the anti-abortion movement. Okay, is it just like it because it wants to take away women's bodily autonomy? No. Is it just like it because it is, wants to uphold kind of this patriarchal idea that women's role should be to be, homemakers, or, basically, is it like it in any of the ways that make the anti-abortion movement bad? And the answer is no. It's just like it because they want to achieve their goals incrementally because right now their views aren't popular. And it's like, okay, that could apply to so many other things. So yeah, it just seems like, there are many examples of different movements where you can imagine they want to achieve their goals incrementally because their views aren't popular right now. And yeah, there are certainly plenty of other movements I'd say I'm happy to agree with, which I think can't achieve things immediately. And if they did try to achieve their goals immediately, that would be unpopular. I mean, for example, you could talk about, maybe this isn't like a perfect analogy, but I would say that the monarchy, kind of anti-monarchy sentiment in the UK, one of the ways to achieve that is kind of an incrementalism of sorts. Like, I think that, because right now it'll be really unpopular, but if you maybe kind of did it incrementally, like you kind of, for example, changed our national anthem so it wasn't God Save the Queen, maybe took the Queen off the money, blah, 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 like kind of slowly did things, that might actually eventually get to your goals. So, again, the point is, if there are, and I would assume that most people who would kind of call themselves kind of progressives, which is what I would assume Contra is, and that's what I would assume this person would consider themselves, would probably agree that the monarchy is bad and therefore should be opposed. But anti-monarchism is the anti-monarchism movement like the abortion movement? Well, no. So yeah, I don't think that really affected my point.
That's pretty silly reasoning, and I don't think anybody should take that type of argument seriously.
Oh my god, you're defensive. Contra...
I don't... Wait, hold on, why am I defensive?
That you're ever going to get political success-wise.
Obviously, that's pretty silly reasoning, and I don't think anybody should take that type of argument seriously.
Oh my god, you're defensive.
Okay.
Contra wasn't making an argument, she was just drawing a comparison between two political movements.
Oh, okay, okay, that's kind of fair enough. Like, obviously, what I was doing there, if you'll notice, is I was kind of making, I guess, the suggestion and the intimation that I believe Contra's choice to make that specific comparison was intended to draw an association. Like, and that is my belief, because I don't think Contra would have as easily said, like the... whatever. There are many movements that use incrementalism because to go full out would be unpopular. So, the anti-monarchy movement could be one example. But yeah, so like the anti-monarchy movement, for example, they want to do incremental goals to achieve their ends. I don't think Contra would have said that because I think Contra specifically chose a kind of more conservative, anti-progressive movement to draw that association. So I don't believe it was an explicit argument from Contra, but I do very much still, to this day, believe that it was a kind of intentional way of making that association in people's heads without actually arguing in any way that that there is actually a substantial similarity between the gender critical movement and the abortion movement.
Okay, so this chart is a bit complicated, but I just want to point out a few issues. Firstly, while believing in Zionist conspiracy theories is pretty anti-Semitic, opposing Zionism in general while not being against Jewish individuals is totally valid.
When did Contra say otherwise? She's talking about how bigots depersonify the target of their bigotry. There's nothing wrong with opposing Zionism as an ideology on the condition that really is all you're doing.
Yeah, so the point I was making is that therefore you would also have to recognize that opposing trans ideology in a non-conspiratorial way would mean that that doesn't fit into the kind of parallels being drawn there. The point of the video was almost seemed to be arguing, well, you have these bigoted positions, and these are based on these kind of conspiracies that people have. And basically, the point I was making is, well, what about when it's not a conspiracy? Sure, there are Zionist conspiracy theories or anti-Zionist conspiracy theories, and those are most likely motivated by anti-Semitism, but conversely, somebody just saying, well, I have criticisms of Zionism, isn't necessarily anti-Semitic. And in the exact same sense, of course, there might be kind of gender-critical conspiracy theories, but, or rather, you know, like kind of conspiracy theories about trans ideology, and maybe you could say those are motivated by bigotry, if you like, but just a general aversion to gender ideology itself really isn't motivated by bigotry, is basically the point I was making. Someone saying opposing Zionism, well, like I know who you are, is almost always anti-Semitic. Yeah, I don't know about that. Like, my attitude, I mean, I'm pretty kind of whatever on the whole thing. Like, I'm entirely neutral on it. But, you know, okay, there's gonna be an argument about Zionism, which is gonna be fun. I'm not gonna get involved because whatever. You know, I've made a video about kind of relating to the Israel stuff before, but in a way, the video kind of didn't involve making a clear statement. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Whatever.
However, depersonifying Jewish people as Zionists or Zionism is bigotry.
The problem really is the conspiracy theory aspect, which is the problem with all the other positions listed, except for the gender critical position, which isn't a conspiracy theory.
Out of curiosity, what's conspiratorial about the term feminazi, especially considering it's just a hyperbolic slang term for a particularly extreme feminist? For that matter, what's conspiratorial about the concept of the friend zone? It just means that a woman sees you too much as a friend to want to...
Okay, yeah, okay, I get that. So basically saying it's not actually, those two things aren't a conspiracy. Obviously, yeah, the Zionist, what is it, like Zionist occupied government, is that? Yeah, the Zionist occupied government and the gay agenda are conspiracies, but the thing for women isn't. I mean, in that case, it's a bit weird, actually, because literally, I guess the only problem with, so I guess, I mean, I'm giving the W to Ephrommentator here, and that, like, yes, okay, I'll agree. Feminazis in the friend zone aren't conspiracies, but yeah, in that case, I guess it's just like the choice of words. I mean, to be honest, like I really do feel like this point is like very dumb from Contra. I mean, because when you look at it, you're just like, but like the reason why like people calling like being bigoted against women is bad is not because they believe in the friend zone or because they call women feminazis. It's because they're against progress for women's rights. So yeah, like it's just kind of like, again, it seems like another example of just drawing all sorts of weird, arbitrary comparisons or like arbitrary parallels, which don't actually amount to anything. And I would still definitely hold to that position. Like, I guess, yeah, like I say, I'm giving the kind of technical W on a technicality here, because of the fact that, yeah, like I say, I was wrong to say that feminazis and the friend zone is a conspiracy theory thing. But conversely, the main point I was making is that this is just a random list of groups and then terms used by people who disagree with those groups as if to imply some sort of parallel when there isn't necessarily.
To date or have sex with you. Both terms have been abused by misogynists, I won't deny that, but they aren't conspiratorial.
I should also point out that this chart would fall under the category of drawing superficial parallels between different movements to imply they're all the same in some deeper sense. Again, that's very silly.
Oh, yeah, okay, yes, there we go, let's see.
Why? Oh, he doesn't answer that question at any point in this video, by the way.
Well, look, it's literally in the word superficial. It's silly to draw superficial parallels to imply movements are the same. Like, if you can't explain why the gender critical movement is bad or harmful, and the only thing you can do is say, well, they support incrementalism, like the anti-abortion movement. They believe in a transgender conspiracy theory, just like homophobes believe in the gay agenda. It's like you're not actually making a criticism of the gender critical movement. That's my problem. Just pointing to superficial parallels that don't actually speak to why you can't say the gender critical movement is wrong because they believe in, even if there is a gender critical conspiracy or like a kind of a trans ideology conspiracy theory that gender critical people believe in, that wouldn't show the gender critical movement is wrong. The gender critical movement does want to engage in incremental strategies because perhaps their beliefs, as stated plainly, might be unpopular in the current political climate, and you could say that's like the anti-abortion movement, but that doesn't make the gender critical movement wrong. So again, in a word, I would say the fact I mentioned superficial, I think, is sufficient explanation for why why it's not a good comparison.
Just so you all know. But he does make that point multiple times.
In fact, I would argue that feeling threatened is the distinctive psychological experience of bigotry, much more so than feeling hateful.
So not only does Contra argue with these weird, sweeping, superficial parallels, but also often argues with weird moral implications. Like, any threatening movement could use the exact logic Contra is using right now. White nationalists could argue that Black Lives Matter is bigoted because they feel threatened. And you know who else feels threatened? Bigots. Now, I'm not making that argument because I'm not Contra, but that's what Contra's logic would allow for.
Yeah, okay, I can agree with that. Let's see.
Quick question, what's the difference between what King Critical has gotten on to Contra for doing, that being drawing superficial parallels between groups, and King Critical drawing a superficial parallel to what Contra said and something a white supremacist could hypothetically say?
Well, because I was kind of addressing any attempt Contra might make to make a superficial parallel. The point I was making is Contra was saying, basically, or the implication seemed to be, Contra says, feeling threatened is an aspect of being in is something you will see in bigoted movements, which would then allow Contra to say, hey, look, the gender critical movement looks pretty threatened. That must, and from that imply, oh, so they must be a bigoted movement, because after all, being threatened is a very common experience of bigotry. So the point I was making is, well, by that kind of same logic, you could say any movement that involves people feeling threatened is bigoted. So I was basically, in that context, preempting, or I guess kind of addressing what I recognize to be a potential conclusion someone could get from ContraPoints' words. If Contra just says out into the ether, feeling threatened is, one of the things experienced in bigoted movements, one of the driving motivations in bigoted movements, then it's entirely possible someone watching the video might think, yeah, actually, that's interesting because, the lesbian who I told to, shut up and suck my girl dick, she seemed pretty threatened. So I guess she must have been a bigot. And the point is, I think that was ContraPoints' intention, to put that idea in people's heads of, hey, if someone seems threatened by you, it must mean they're a bigot. And I was saying, well, if you carry that logic to its obvious conclusion, you would have to say that actually people who have a legitimate case for feeling threatened would, I guess, also be bigots. So I was just basically showing how you shouldn't take what Contra is saying here and act as if it is some litmus test for establishing or deciding whether or not a movement is bigoted.
Well, I'll answer that question. In Contra's example, it was based off of what people do actually say, not based off of what they could maybe hypothetically say. But you're right, a white supremacist could theoretically say this. So what? This is nothing more than guilt by hypothetical association. And by the way, a white supremacist claiming that would still be wrong because, well, who's Black Lives Matter bigoted against? The police? I mean, they do feel threatened by police, don't get me wrong, but that's because police engage in brutality against minorities. That's the entire point of the movement.
Whereas biological males definitely don't engage in brutality against women. No, yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, so yeah, the claim is, well, so what if you make this parallel? Well, again, the point I'm making is that the fact that all Contra says is feeling threatened is an aspect of, a common motivator for a bigoted movement. And I'm saying, yes, maybe, but you can't use that as a way to imply, and I believe Contra's intent is to imply this, that the gender critical movement is therefore bigoted because they feel threatened. Because, of course, there are many other movements which might be composed of people who feel threatened or might be motivated by feeling threatened, which would not rightly be considered bigoted. Now, of course, this person then says, well, you know what? The Black Lives Matter, it's not legitimate to call them bigoted because who are they bigoted against? And that's the point. Again, so if you want to argue against a gender critical movement, make a clear case for why it is bigoted. Don't just kind of, like I say, and like I've accused ContraPoint of doing, basically make these kind of weird associations where you just sort of allude to other things or allude to potential kind of motivations that might make somebody bigoted or might motivate bigotry. Actually talk directly about bigotry as an issue. And that was basically my criticism. Contra doesn't really make the claim the gender critical movement is bigoted because blah, blah, blah. Instead, Contra says, well, they sure do seem threatened. And like I say, I don't think that's a legitimate way to argue.
But even then, Contra never said that feeling threatened makes you a bigot, but that bigots claim to feel threatened. Again, those are two entirely different claims.
Yeah, again, I mean, okay, like there is, I think, basically a misunderstanding of, like I say, the point I was making. The point I'm making is, and it's worth noting, I mean, I think it was kind of obvious, the way I was engaging with this video was partially thinking about how ContraPoints might be engaging in manipulative language by drawing these associations, or basically through kind of the art of implication, implying things might be the case. And with that said, of course, yeah, what Contra explicitly says is one of the motivations for being bigoted is feeling threatened. But I think it's clear what ContraPoints is trying to imply is, the gender critical movement sure does seem threatened. With the implication, yes, that they are, by that logic, bigoted.
And now,
I don't know what the skip things mean.
You're immediately getting baited into some bullshit semantic debate about what is a real woman. It doesn't really matter, does it?
Okay, I'm interested in this because when this happened, I literally this was an example of where if I had been reacting to that in a live stream, I would have done that thing I do where I just completely break down at how ridiculous this claim is. But and I kind of returned back to this was so when I made that video for April Fools where I basically kind of sarcastically roasted every single video I've responded to. This was basically the claim that I used to make fun of Contra. I basically said, oh, and Contra makes the really good point that it doesn't matter whether somebody's a man or woman. What really matters is whether or not biological males should have access to women's spaces and women's, blah, blah, blah. And obviously, the point I was making pretty obviously is that actually, when you look at the rights that trans-identified people are claiming they should have, they all seem to center on the question of, are trans-identified males women?
I would like to know if Contra thinks it matters whether or not being trans has any sort of meaningful definition.
It just means not cis. That's it.
Because if you're going to advocate for trans rights, I would think that what it means to be trans matters quite a lot.
I mean, if pedantically attempting to define what it meant to be transgender was getting in the way of actually advocating for the rights of transgender people, then yeah, I imagine Contra would be saying essentially the same thing. In fact, the people who most insist on there being some kind of strict definition of what it means to be transgender are trans medicalists who are not really looked highly upon in ContraPoint's community.
Right? What about being black? Does that have any definition?
Well, race is a social construct, and attempts to create a coherent definition regarding what it means to be black have led to things like the one drop of blood test, the paper bag test, and putting a pencil in somebody's hair in order to see what race they are. I am not kidding.
Okay, so let's be clear. I mean, really, obviously, the point I'm making here is that to effectively organize for a group's rights, you have to be able to have some kind of coherent concept of what it means to belong to that group. Like, it is totally, you can't advocate for the rights of black people if you don't know who's a black person. So I'm obviously making the point that in the similar sense, it's pretty difficult to advocate for the rights of women if you have no idea who's a woman. And it's women, okay, I want to stress this. I have never ever been of the position that you need to give a perfect definition. Because giving a perfect definition for a lot of things is hard. I think you can do it. Like, I think necessarily, if we have words and we use those words, there must be a way of explaining precisely when we use those words and when we don't use those words. And if we were to exactly perfectly explain the way we use words and the way we don't use words, we would have a perfect definition. Having said that, often the way we use words can be complicated, can be kind of confusing, can even seem contradictory at times, and therefore coming up with a perfect definition is difficult. But my question would, the point is you still need to be able to give some kind of definition, like some kind of idea of what it is you're talking about. And in the case of especially the non-trans medicalist point of view, where being a woman is literally just an identity, where it's I'm a woman because I say I'm a woman, which you'll notice is incredibly circular, because it's I'm a woman because I say I'm a woman because I say I'm a woman because I say, goes on forever. You literally have no idea what they're talking about. What does that mean? When you say you're a woman, what are you actually saying? If you're just saying that you say you're a woman when you say you're a woman, then that doesn't mean anything. That's kind of the issue. So again, yeah, that's kind of my point. You need to be able to offer some kind of good definition. So the point is, can you offer up a perfect definition for who counts as black? Oh no, that might be quite a challenge. I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but it would certainly be difficult and a contentious kind of thing to do. But you can at least, for example, talk about who definitely is black and who definitely isn't black. And that's a useful thing to do. You have to have some concept of who's black. So yeah, okay, we're gonna see what more is said.
They did that in apartheid South Africa. So, no, it doesn't.
Wait, so it doesn't matter who's black. Okay, I mean, I don't know, so apparently the, we look at, all of the, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, all those people, it didn't matter that they had any concept of who was actually black. It would have been they could have been sat there advocating, for the rights in front of an entire group of just pasty white people and being like, we need to fight for equal rights. And they wouldn't have thought to themselves, actually, wait, am I addressing the right group here? No, they would have just been like, no, yeah, this is right. No, obviously they needed to have some concept of who it is they were advocating for.
Look, trans people can't even agree among ourselves what gender is. In fact, if you even try to answer the question, you end up enraging some part of the community who feels excluded.
So honestly, at this point, the intellectual side of this debate is pretty wrapped up. Contra is admitting not only an inability to arrive at a satisfying definition of gender or defense for that definition, but also saying that this is true for the wider trans community.
No, she's just making the point that the wider trans community has various definitions of gender, and not all of them agree with each other.
Well, the point is, again, the issue is that if the trans community as a whole can't come up with any good definition that works, then what are they advocating for? I feel like that's a massive problem. And I mean, also, apart from anything else, it's worth noting, Contra is using this as an excuse to not offer up a good definition. And it's that doesn't make any sense. How can you have a trans movement where people are advocating for radically different ideas of what it even means to be trans? You couldn't do this with other movements. Like, you couldn't have the kind of, black liberation movement where there are a bunch of people thinking that a whole load of kind of Caucasian, northwestern European white people should count as black just because they say so. That would not have been, you wouldn't have been able to have a unified movement based on that. So it really does matter that the trans movement as a whole will say trans, and it's of course a massive joke that ContraPoints is like trans liberation now, and then it's like, okay, liberation for who? Oh well, we don't even know. If you ask anybody in the trans movement, you're going to get like 1,000 different answers, and no one's going to be able to tell you. It's just a bit awkward.
So if you care about having a definition of gender that makes sense and is coherent and can be agreed upon by people, then Contra is basically admitting that you shouldn't buy what's being sold here.
Yup, if you want a simplistic and dogmatic worldview, this is not the side for you. Glad we can agree on that.
Okay, so again, let's just go through what I said again.
That makes sense.
Them agree with each other.
So if you care about having a definition of gender that makes sense and is coherent and can be agreed upon by people, then Contra is basically admitting that you shouldn't buy.
So yeah, basically, a definition of what is it? Coherent. I don't know. So coherent matters. Like the fact that basically when I say a woman is a biological female, I think you all know what I'm saying there, right? Like that's not a difficult. And you can of course ask the question, well, what exactly makes somebody a biological female? And then I would say, obviously, well, somebody whose phenotype is organized around facilitating the function of a large gamete in sexual reproduction. But then you can say, okay, well, what exactly does it mean? And, yeah, you could, at that, really kind of get into, we could really get into the weeds of that. But what I mean, at a base level, it's coherent, because I think we all roughly know, like, who's a biological female. You could, like I say, really get into the weeds of what exactly, and that's why, please note again, I've never said you need to be able to give a perfect definition of biological female, or indeed a perfect definition of woman. What you need to be able to do is give an indication of what you're talking about that people can understand. So if you say, what exactly makes somebody a biological female? I'm allowed to say, well, I don't really know what exactly, like the very specifics of what makes somebody a biological female, but it's women who give birth, it's mums, it's I could just point to a whole load of people, it's things like having a vagina, having, like the kind of typical female form and things like that. And yes, is that a perfect definition? No, it's a very imperfect definition, but it works to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, and you can kind of, therefore work from there. Like, and actually in practice, it's a really useful definition. Like, think about how often in practice do you actually find yourself getting how often in practice do you find yourself being unable to tell whether somebody's a woman based on the biological sex definition? It's a pretty good one. So yeah, there you go. Like, and that's what I mean when I say coherent. And I'm seeing Laura's post definition, and yeah, like I think it's possible there are trans affirming definitions which might actually at least clear the first hurdle of being coherent. Whether they're the best definitions we have is another question. But certainly, this was at a time when I was really just kind of hyper focused on the self-identity, Uber alles kind of approach to trans identity. And at that point, I was just it was just crazy to me how completely incoherent it was. But of course, yeah, you'll notice that my claim that we should have a definition that is coherent, that people can agree upon, that makes sense, that is actually going to be conducive to working towards, it's wild, isn't it? Because when you think about it, okay, what is the first thing you do when you write an academic essay? You establish definitions. Like if you want to write an essay on why socialism is good, one of the first things you should do is define socialism. And while you might define socialism in a somewhat novel way, you would be writing a bad essay if you started off saying socialism is whatever anybody feels like calling socialism, or something like that, like a definition where you're basically not saying anything, or a definition where you do define it in a totally counterintuitive way. Say socialism is when the rich people get to eat all of the poor people. Like people go, okay, that's not correct. But yeah, so the point is just in general, like in a kind of academic sense, you want to define terms. And yes, I think when that translates to kind of activism and actually liberation, you also need to be able to define terms in terms of what you're talking about.
What's being sold here?
Yup, if you want a simplistic and dogmatic
Yes, this is how
worldview,
it's-
this is not the side for you. Glad we can agree on that.
Joanne is projecting her own memories of troubled adolescence onto trans men and then saying, oh, clearly they were going through the same things I was, just someone persuaded them to transition.
I'm going to blast through a lot of Contra's response to JK's article because I already responded to Vorsh's attack on JK in this regard, so I will have a link to that now. I do just want to say that JK is mostly thinking out loud here. She's wondering if maybe it's possible that growing up as a woman under patriarchy might be a contributing factor to the desire to be a different gender.
So there you got a thing about just asking questions. But the thing is, I mean, look, the main thing with just asking questions is, I've been accused of that in the past in many instances, and a lot of the time it's like it's an example of where like an actual legitimate thing, which is, well, people just asking questions when they're trying to do something nefarious, is obviously objectionable. But so for those, in case there was anybody who was kind of listening but not watching, while I was talking there, a kind of the I guess like Wikipedia article or something for just asking questions. And if you don't know, so just asking questions is basically like a kind of way of making fun of the idea of, essentially it's a lot like playing devil's advocate, you know, and it's something that people like to make fun of. But the thing is, yes, I would agree that sometimes somebody saying horrible, evil things under the guise of, well, I'm just asking questions, can be something to object to. But that's not a label you want to apply or a criticism you want to apply liberally, because, of course, a lot of the time, actually exploring ideas is a very valid thing to do. And it's worth noting, of course, that J.K. Rowling isn't saying something horrible here. Like, all J.K. Rowling is saying is, hey, you know, maybe it's possible that internalized misogyny is influencing some of this. That's not a horrible thing to say. J.K. Rowling, like, just asking questions. Okay, you know what would be a good example of the just asking questions thing? The Mitchell and Webb sketch where David Mitchell's like, have you tried killing all of the poor? Wait, I'll do his voice. Hello, my name's David Mitchell. Have you tried killing all of the poor? And then they're like, well, no, but we're not going to do that. And he's like, well, I'm just saying, you know, maybe we should kind of do some research to see whether or not it might actually achieve some results. You know, it might make the situation better. You know, there's no harm in looking into it. And like, basically that's kind of the joke. Although there is actually a twist at the end, which I won't spoil. But yeah, basically the point is, David Mitchell, at least at the beginning, is presented as somebody who, hello, Radical Ramblings, is presented as somebody who's like just saying, you know, floating the idea. I'm just floating the idea. But of course, you know, one obvious way to read that is, oh wait, you know, this is actually trying to introduce a pretty scary notion under the banner of just asking questions. That would be a legitimate time to criticize that. You know, if I was saying, you know, sometimes I want. Sorry, I'm doing the David Mitchell voice still, but I don't need to. You know, like, sometimes I wonder if it would solve all the problems if we just flew all of the trans people onto an island and just left them there. You know, I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I just, you know, was wondering if that might solve the problem. You know, if I'm saying that, okay, yeah, you can criticize me for that. That's obviously a pretty objectionable thing to be saying, and it's pretty disingenuous of me to be kind of introducing that idea under the banner of, well, I'm just wondering if it might work. You know, I'm just asking questions. You know, it doesn't make sense to maybe do that. But again, the point is, what J.K. Rowling is saying here, you can't really say is you know, falls under that, because it's not nefarious. It's not nefarious to say, well, maybe internalized misogyny is a point. The reality is that trans identity is something which, no matter where you come from, and no matter which way the research falls, I would say confidently needs more research. Like, we can't act as if the jury is out on this. We can't act as if this thing, which has evolved kind of conceptually quite a lot over the last century, you know, like, this is something where new kind of ways of conceiving of trans identity were coming out within the last few decades. This is not something where we can say, oh, we all know everything about it. It's perfectly legitimate for anybody to say anything. Like, genuinely, somebody could say, hey, you know, is it all the plastic? in all the endocrine disruptors? Is that causing people to become trans? And you know what? They're allowed to ask that question because we don't know, and we can't say that we know. We can't say like, oh no, it definitely isn't, and it's offensive of you to even ask that question. No, like it's, again, like basically the conclusion here is you can't use the whole just asking questions label to dismiss the idea of anybody floating any idea, regardless of how inoffensive it is.
Which is an intuitively reasonable argument that deserves a fair response.
There we go. Okay, so there we go. I'm saying it's an intuitive, reasonable argument to say, hey, maybe internalized misogyny is a reason why women are coming out and saying they don't want to be women. That seems like quite reasonable, let's see.
Really? Because intuitively, my first questions would be, why is it only happening now, considering essentially every society in all of existence has been patriarchal, and why is it happening in the closest things to egalitarian societies we have today?
Okay, so those are some questions. First of all, it's worth noting, there are many examples in the past, like many examples of women assuming the role and costume of men. So that is something that happened. We already have this idea that women wanted to be perceived as men for various reasons in order to subvert patriarchy. But then you might say, well, why is it only happening now that, obviously we're kind of coming out of patriarchy and things are becoming more equal? Well, it's because this is something which would only be available to women once we do achieve, I guess, a certain level of getting out of patriarchy, if you like. Like, obviously, in the most patriarchal society ever, a woman saying, I identify as a man now, guys, so you can't be misogynistic towards me, wouldn't fly. But nowadays, of course, society is less patriarchal and things are more egalitarian. So, yeah, nowadays, there is the option of women identifying out of patriarchy. Well, no, let me be clear. There is that as a perceivable option. I don't believe in reality women can identify out of patriarchy, but it is there. It is presented as an option. Like, that's the thing. Why is it only happening now? Because it's only now that it's being presented as an option. But in the past, when, like I say, it wasn't presented as an option, you still had many kind of famous examples of women dressing up as men, presenting as men, in order to try and get by and to escape patriarchy. So the thing is, you would have to argue, that while there is a history of women pretending to be men to escape patriarchy, and there are now a growing number of biological females saying that they are men, that these two things have nothing to do with each other. And I don't think that's a very kind of credible position to hold to.
Mind you, how much intuitive sense something makes doesn't actually matter. Intuitively, a flat Earth makes more sense than a round Earth, a stationary Earth makes more sense than a rotating Earth, and a geocentric universe makes more sense than a heliocentric universe.
Okay, so I want to stress this, okay. The thing is, intuition is really, really good until something comes along and contradicts it. Like, that's my point. So what I'm saying is, it's reasonable for somebody to suggest anything until somebody offers up a really obvious contradiction. Like a really obvious reason why, like, say, oh no, we've taken that seriously, we've researched it. Like, that's the thing. Yes, the first caveman to say, hey, I think the Earth is flat, should have been taken seriously. Because, yeah, the Earth looks pretty flat on a human level, and it isn't until thousands of years of kind of geographically minded geometry that we were able to say, no, yeah, okay, we're very sure it's flat, and all the other things too, like with heliocentrism. I mean, it's worth noting there were credible objections to geocentrism. There were credible objections to the heliocentric model well into the kind of most recent millennium. So the kind of 1000 AD to 1999, there were some credible objections to the heliocentric model, which were only really kind of ironed out in the, I think after Galileo. Like, I think there was still, I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, and I'm willing to admit I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure I remember hearing that there was still some problems with Galileo's maths and like his kind of, theories and all that kind of stuff, which weren't ironed out until a little bit afterwards. So the point is, it was still legitimate at that point for people to say, hey, there are still some problems with the heliocentric model. Perhaps we need to, bear in mind that the jury is still out on the geocentric model. That was a perhaps reasonable thing for people to say. So yeah, actually, when it comes to what ideas is it appropriate to float as a suggestion for people to consider, them being intuitive matters. Yeah.
We know this because when people had nothing more than pure intuition to rely upon, these were the conclusions they drew. Do you believe all of these ideas are worthy of response simply because intuitively they make sense?
Again, so the reason they're not worthy of response now is because we have such a mountain of evidence to show that your intuitive, just like first sense of what might be the case, is not correct. So that's the thing. Like, yeah, I would agree. If we had some kind of, which to be fair, I don't think you could even have this. So it will always be legitimate for people to suggest that internalized misogyny is a possible explanation for trans identity in females, because you would have to have some kind of hypothetical argument that could show, as concretely as we know that the Earth is a globe and that we know that the sun revolves around the Earth, that we know that trans-identified females aren't doing it because of internalized misogyny. So actually, I will say this now, not only is it currently legitimate to float that idea, I suspect it will always be legitimate to float that idea, and people are just going to have to get over that. Like, genuinely, you're just going to have to get over it. Like, you might not like somebody saying, oh, I think that internalized misogyny could be an explanation for why some people, why some biological females identify as trans, but you have to accept the fact that that is something which is still, like, people will speculate about that until there is very obviously no reason to speculate about it.
And if so, when's your debate with the Flat Earth Society?
I think whenever a little girl on the
I've told everyone before, the one argument for the flat Earth that I've not heard a response to, and I don't want to hear a response to it, because I like saying, I enjoy saying that there is one flat Earth argument that I don't have a response to, because it kind of like, it's almost like creates the idea that like, just the enjoyment that I have, the anarchic sense of pleasure of knowing that in some sense in my mind right now, you could say the scales, oh, where are they? I mean, there is a flat Earth argument that I haven't heard a response to, but yeah, I'm not going to tell you it in case somebody tries to debunk it.
Playground picks up a toy truck. An endocrinologist pops out from behind a tree and says, "We've got a nonconformist on our hands, Johnson. Stand by, I'm gonna trans him."
I feel like probably I haven't seen this video in a while. The video that I made, I mean. I feel like probably the response I give to this is something along the lines of this being a very kind of reductive understanding of how, like, transing the gender nonconformity away.
Again, this argument is very, I guess, immature, unappreciative of nuance.
Contra wasn't making an argument, though. She was engaging in what we in the trans rights movement have dubbed a joke.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So there we go. I mean, obviously, I've said this before. One of my attitudes is, I will say, I don't know that I'm happy with this ContraPoints video. I think I could have done it better because I did rush it out. Like, it's worth noting, I was kind of trying to do two things which were kind of contradictory. On the one hand, I was trying to make the most efficient, time-efficient debunking of Contra I could, and at the same time, I was trying to get it out as soon as possible. And those two things were at loggerheads. I'm not sure if I'm really happy with the video. But I have said before that one of my kind of things I like to do is work with the assumption that a lot of truth is said in jest, or rather that a lot of attempted truth is said in jest. And if someone makes a joke about something, they're trying to actually communicate some kind of point. Like if somebody points out how absurd it would be, how humorous it would be to imagine somebody being transed just for playing with a truck at the playground, that the kind of implication of that is that, well, isn't it silly that gender critical people would suggest that?
Well, it's not as if every single slightly gender non-conforming girl is immediately turned into a trans man, so I bet J.K. Rowling feels stupid for suggesting that might sometimes be a contributory factor.
You know, you say this claim deserves a response, but what you actually describe the claim as is so vague that you can't respond to it. So it might, we don't know, it only might, sometimes, meaning not in every case, be one of multiple factors.
So yeah, what we're kind of slowly arriving at here is the point I kind of already made, which is actually, yeah, there is nothing you can say that will mean that people can't float the idea that, hey, maybe internalized misogyny is one of the reasons why biological females are identifying as trans. There is nothing you can say that I can conceive of that would mean that I would have to say, you know what, no, nobody can suggest that idea anymore. It's entirely unreasonable for anybody to suggest that in any context. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, I would agree. It is an unfalsifiable statement, I guess. But the thing is, just because something's unfalsifiable doesn't mean you're not allowed to say it. Like, I can say, hey, maybe, well, we'll just go with the example, yeah. Hey, maybe internalized misogyny is a contributory factor here, and I'm sorry that you can't necessarily prove that's not true, and that therefore I guess I'm just going to be able to speculate that might be true. Anyway, but you're just going to have to get over that.
That leads to medical transition. You can say that about literally anything. With how unfalsifiable this claim is, you could replace people transition because of patriarchy and gender nonconformity.
Okay, I'm interested to see what the example is going to be.
With people transition because of invisible dragons, and it would make just as much sense.
Well, look, okay, here's the thing. That clearly does not make as much sense, because there is no intuitive logic there. Like, that's where you get back to the intuition thing. Like, not only is it unfalsifiable, which means you can't disprove it, which, obviously is not a good thing in science, but it at least means that it's not wrong, which is, it's certainly, I would say in some sense, being unfalsifiable is probably better epistemological ground than being false. But with that said, it's also worth noting that it is intuitive. Like, if somebody says, hey, maybe, the fact that it kind of sucks to be a woman, and the fact that we have said that somebody can just decide they're not a woman anymore, maybe, possibly, those two things in combination have created an increased number of biological females who have decided they're not going to be women anymore and are going to identify as men instead. That is not only a reasonable thing to speculate based on the fact that you can't prove it wrong, it's also a reasonable thing to speculate based on the fact it kind of makes sense, right? Like, hey, yeah, that does seem like those two things could go together to lead to the... Whereas conversely, of course, there is no reason to, no positive reason to think that there is an invisible pink dragon involved or something like that.
Side note, if you guys want to see the exact same concepts being discussed here, analyzed through Carl Sagan's famous invisible dragon hypothetical, I actually did that on Medium. Link in the description.
Whereas I feel like transmasculine people are less vilified, but
so infantilized. I think my response to this is basically to point out that it's an anti-feminist talking point to suggest that, like, women are affected by patriarchy. Let's see.
So infantilized.
Couldn't this accusation be leveled at any social movement that understands systemic oppression?
Yes, exactly.
As impacting human choice? Like, you could just as validly say that feminism infantilizes women by acting as if a lack of female representation in STEM fields disinclines women to engage in STEM fields. What? Are women just big babies who can't choose to enter into STEM fields for themselves? I'm not really impressed by any argument that appeals to the existence of human agency as a response to people making points about structures of oppression.
Yes, well done. Oh, this guy is so smart.
This is exactly what Contra is doing here, saying these infantilizers are suggesting that patriarchy might incline some women to view themselves as men, but actually trans women are adults with self-agency who
I don't know where that was coming from.
can decide they're men for themselves. Thank you very much.
For some reason, I just had like the stupidest moment in the world where I thought because I just paused the video that it would mean that the person who made the response would have to wait until I unpaused it before they could make their response, when obviously it's pre-recorded.
So women are being systemically oppressed into becoming transgender. Did I understand what you just implied correctly?
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, yeah, the point I was making basically is that it is a kind of conservative talking point to suggest that personal agency wins out against systemic oppression. Like it's that simple. And you can apply this to literally anything. Like how often do you see people like Thomas Sowell suggest that anybody who believes in systemic racism is infantilizing black people by acting as if they can't just bootstrap their way out of poverty and things like that? Like it's this criticism of infantilizing people because you recognize systemic oppression is a very overplayed criticism from the conservative right, and I really don't have much patience for it. So yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. They might sometimes be getting systemically oppressed into becoming transgender along with other factors. I don't even know how to properly respond to that because I'm not even sure how to address such a ridiculous claim. But you know what?
Well, look, I mean, again, the point I made, I think, is pretty unassailable. It's not like, again, basically, I don't think you can argue that you are infantilizing people by recognizing the reality of systemic oppression is anything other than a conservative talking point.
I'll try, because the main issue with that claim is, well, it doesn't make any sense. Patriarchies are set up specifically for the purpose of power structures. If a woman could leave that power structure, the power structure is essentially meaningless.
Okay, I can see the confusion here. So the point is, it's not that women are being systemically oppressed into identifying as trans. Not really. It's that women are being systemically oppressed and trans identity is a kind of band-aid solution that's presenting itself. Like that's kind of the simpler way of thinking about it. Like it's not as if the kind of trans or the patriarchy is trying to erase women as people who exist, because of course patriarchy needs women to exist. But the point is that what patriarchy is doing, and again I'm talking about patriarchy as obviously an impersonal force, like obviously this is all happening kind of naturally, I think, through kind of systems of oppression. Patriarchy is making it so that women are less able to organize to defend against patriarchal oppression, and the way that's being done is by giving women the false hope of identifying out of womanhood and thus identifying out of patriarchy.
To put it another way, the fact that this can even happen under a patriarchal society is evidence this claim is incorrect.
Okay, so, that's okay. I don't get that, because it's kind of like, do you not understand this idea of systems of oppression will often create avenues by which a member of an oppressed group can succeed, but they only succeed by actually upholding the systems of oppression to which they belong. So yes, a woman can perhaps succeed by completely abandoning femininity or completely abandoning like any indication of her womanhood, including, of course, nowadays even like the biological signifiers of her womanhood via surgery. She can do that potentially, but the point is she's not achieved what feminism or what an anti-patriarchal system should be setting out to do, which would be overthrowing the idea that womanhood should be viewed as inferior. She has simply decided she's not a woman anymore, and therefore patriarchy has survived. Like that allows patriarchy to be sustained because there is not a systemic... I mean, it's basically like the fact that we live in a deeply classist society, and yet there are poor people who can become rich, and they don't become rich so they escape the oppression of poverty, but they don't escape it by dismantling capitalism. They escape it by simply moving from one class to the other.
General note. Contra talks about troubled blood. This was...
What happened to the general note text? I kind of liked it. Let me tell you, I made an edit after the fact, and the general note text accidentally got out of sync.
Definitely the hardest moment for me to not just nitpick every single little thing said. However, I just want...
Yeah, okay, there we go. So yeah, basically what happened is I had it in and I accidentally edited it, so...
to point out that Contra never acknowledges the obvious point that JK says she got into this discussion because of a book she was researching, presumably this book.
Okay, I want to say this, by the way. The claim was that this is a video where I make all of my key points. And you'll notice it's really not. Like, I mean, it just isn't. Like, I would not say, like, if someone said, what video is the video where you really kind of just make your point, like the most important point here? I mean, you'll notice, by the way, like, apart from anything else, I'm in a position of defending J.K. Rowling, who is, like, I like her, but I wouldn't say she's kind of my ideological inspiration or anything like that. So I'm in the position of defending somebody who I basically just think is a good person standing up for a good cause, but I wouldn't view her as kind of one of the key, I guess, thought leaders, to steal Kaelin Conrad's phrase, of the gender critical movement. So that already kind of counts against us. I'm basically in a situation of, for example, I mean, look at how long we spent kind of just dealing with the question of J.K. Rowling speculating about the reasons why trans-identified females might transition, and that's not something which I really think is the most important issue. So yeah, it is just wrong to say that this video is like a microcosm of all of my core beliefs, or like in some way functions as a way of showing most of what I'm doing on this channel. Again, if you want to look at a video like that, I think the best video would be something like my video, How Trans Identity Lies About Reality, or, you know, yeah, something else.
Contra, like a lot of others, presents it as if this book emanates from JK's recent support for gender-critical positions. We don't know how, why, or when JK came up with this idea, but according to her, she began to formulate ideas around transgender identity politics in response to research she did for this book.
Okay, here's how Troubled Blood is introduced in Contra's video.
I should probably talk about the book, since I did go to the trouble to read all 900 pages, because unlike certain other YouTubers, I do in fact know how to read. Troubled Blood was published in September 2020 by Joanne Rowling under her pen name Robert Galbraith.
What follows is primarily a discussion about the transgender serial killer trope, put together with what we can determine regarding J.K. Rowling's views about transgender people from Troubled Blood. Nowhere is if she got these views before or after doing research for Troubled Blood even mentioned.
This is Orwell's nightmare. This is how Nazi
Okay, so yeah, this I kind of feel like is whatever. I'm trying to like, so yeah, basically, I mean, the point I was making, obviously, is that like, it's difficult because obviously what I said was something about me having watched an entire hour-and-a-half long video. So maybe there was some reason why I thought that the fact that it was worth noting we have no reason to believe J.K. Rowling's views J.K. Rowling's views influenced the writing of Troubled Blood. Maybe that was the reason I thought that was relevant at the time. Right now, I mean, I can't really say why I thought that was a relevant thing to include. Although I will say, like, even if, you know, it's not a relevant thing to what Contra said, I mean, it's still a correct point. We don't have any reason to believe that J.K. Rowling J.K. Rowling wrote Troubled Blood because of being gender critical. So yeah, I guess the worst case scenario here is that I said something correct, but something not relevant to what ContraPoints was saying, which is still bad. But yeah, I'd have to kind of go back and like really kind of watch the video back to work out why I said that. And I just don't think it really matters that much. It's like a very minor point. And to be honest, again, it's another example of why I think I'm not so happy with this video, because that's the kind of thing like that really, you know, like in what's supposed to be a time-efficient refuting, I just don't think that's a massively important point.
Germany started.
Okay, so I think the free speech point is worth taking a brief second to address. I'm not aware of any other dubious claim that is enforced in the way that trans women are women is. So while I generally reject talk of Orwellianism on principle because of how overblown it is, 1984 was mostly about policing language by getting people to accept expressions that didn't make logical sense. So there is an equivalence there.
Yep, okay.
Okay, this probably isn't the most relevant point to make, but the point was the language did make sense to the people of Oceania. Plus, many examples of Newspeak had double meanings, which, again, made perfect sense from the point of view of the totalitarian party.
Okay. So I guess the point being made there is that, like, because for some people now, the idea of trans women being women doesn't make sense. It means we're not authoritarian yet. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what point that's really supposed to be making, because yeah, obviously, yeah. So what?
For example, War is Peace was actually a reference to how the party keeps itself stable through waging perpetual warfare. Hell, if you want to play the game of 1984 in language, let me just ask, which one of our sides has very strict definitions, and
What's the problem with having strict definitions?
which side, according to this video, remember, has free-flowing and fluid ones that even members of the side cannot quite agree on?
I'm having definitions that are fluid is actually far more conducive to totalitarianism, whereas having like definitions which are fixed means that you can't have totalitarianism. Like, think about it for a minute. In a society where person is fixed and rigid, you can have like human rights be properly enforced. But in a society where person is fluid and can change from day to day and person to person, you could have human rights be completely disregarded. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but strict, rigid definitions are, I think, at least on balance, and I would perhaps even say consistently and perhaps even always, far less conducive to totalitarianism than fluid language and definitions. I mean, like, obviously you all know that I'm really into kind of, I guess, the quintessentially English conception of liberty, and one of the things that defines that is that the defining feature of totalitarianism is arbitrariness. When my best friend James III launched the Glorious Revolution, his stated reason was that the English people had become subject to arbitrary law. His point being, the problem with King Charles II's... Nope. Wait, is it Charles? James II, sorry. King James II's rules is that they were arbitrary. They weren't fixed. It changed from day to day depending on his personal whim. And that was tyrannical. And it was the kind of liberty, the underlying kind of principle of the doctrine of liberty that William III espoused was what you need if you want to have freedom is rule that is consistent, that has fixed definitions, fixed concepts, things that aren't up to the arbitrary whim of those in power. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of make that point to say that I would very much stand by my position that fixed definitions are the best definitions. Definitions that can go all over the place and be entirely arbitrary are really conducive to totalitarian thinking.
You sure that's why people call Magdalen Berns a bigot? Are you sure she hasn't said anything else about trans women that might lead people to think she's less than hugely sympathetic?
Spoiler alert, Contra is about to take the words of a woman who is angry, justifiably, and use this to reframe that woman as a horrible person who's the real bigot. So much for the tolerant feminists, I guess.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, the point I'm making here is that tone policing of marginalized groups is a pretty shitty thing to do. I'm reminded of somebody who has since denounced me, but I was on a live stream way back in 2014, 2015 when I first started YouTube. I was on a live stream and I remember somebody said something to me. So basically it was an interesting conversation. Big Red. Do y'all remember the feminist Big Red? Was being spoken about. And my instinct as somebody who was, I guess, still kind of new to advocating for feminism was to be like, oh yeah, she's crazy, but she doesn't represent feminism. So my inclination was to denounce her, to be like, oh yeah, she's totally unreasonable, she's whatever. And the person I was speaking to said, no, she was angry, and she was allowed to be angry, and it's not appropriate to make fun of somebody, even if they seem callous, even if they seem, like antagonistic. It's not appropriate to make fun or to denounce that person when they're a member of a marginalized group who has every reason to be angry. And that's kind of something that's really stuck with me. And it's something which I think was in my mind when I was saying that then about Magdalen Berns.
Ultimately, you can dismiss any political movement if you're willing to frame frustration with oppression as irrational and hateful anger.
Contra hasn't been dismissing the movement, though. She's simply responding to the claim that Magdalen Berns was hugely sympathetic. Angry movements can make good points. I imagine Contra would not disagree with that sentence.
General note.
Okay. So yeah, okay, you get the thing. Yeah, okay, so I guess that's the point. Like, would Magdalen Berns be classified as hugely sympathetic? Now, what I want to say about that is, here's the thing. J.K. Rowling spoke to Magdalen Berns personally. And and Magdalen Berns had an online personality. But there are many people, not me, because I'm the most legit person in the game, but there are many people who are different in person than they are online. And therefore, it is possible J.K. Rowling, having spoken to Magdalen Berns personally, had reason to believe that it was appropriate to say Magdalen Berns was actually sympathetic to trans people. And the contrapoint was offering was, well, Magdalen Berns said some stuff that was kind of mean. So the thing is, yes, you could say, well, in isolation, that does function as a way of showing that she wasn't hugely sympathetic. But having said that, J.K. Rowling knew Magdalen Berns personally, or spoke to Magdalen Berns personally. ContraPoints didn't.
More generally, Contra spends a decent chunk of time engaging in a he said, she said thing, where Contra suggests that it's the gender-critical people doing all the attacking and being horrible. But meanwhile, we know that gender-critical women feel that it's the gender identity extreme.
I'm glad this person's enjoying Sony Vegas.
Extremists who are always attacking them and being
I did some blurring recently on something.
horrible to them.
Oh, I know what the most complicated thing I did for Sony Vegas recently is when I made Kaelin Conrad's face appear on top of Fred, the YouTuber.
Given that it would be difficult
Sorry,
to
I wasn't paying
quantify
attention. Wait,
she said thing, where Contra suggests that it's the gender-critical people doing all the attacking and being horrible. But meanwhile, we know that gender-critical women feel that it's the gender identity extremists who are always attacking them and being horrible to them. Given that it would be difficult to quantify which side is worst in this debate, and moreover, that to even establish which side is worst wouldn't have any bearing on the truth of the claims on offer, I'm far more interested in which side has the best arguments.
This is the level of antipathy that I attract from trans Twitter.
But I will say that it's telling that many trans activists have experienced hatred and attacks from other trans activists.
First off, I thought you weren't going to talk about which side is meaner because you don't think it matters, and second...
I don't think I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I think I said that it's difficult to say one way or the other which side is worse. Like, and certainly, like, I can't offer like I can speculate. I mean, I can say, well, I think that the trans side is worse or whatever else, but I can't be like, here's my concrete evidence for why. However, I did think it was worth pointing out that while I can't say which side is worse, it's interesting and perhaps illustrative that Contra is attacked not only by gender-critical people, apparently, but also by other trans people. That is an interesting thing. Conversely, I would say that I don't usually see gender-critical people being attacked by other gender-critical people anything like to the same degree.
Off. Oh no, we aren't a centralized hive mind.
Boring. Anyway, look, the thing is, let me be clear. Gender-critical people disagree with each other all the time. Loads. But they don't attack each other. ContraPoints hasn't faced disagreement from trans-identified people or trans activists. ContraPoints has faced attack, cancellation, being called a bigot, being called a murderer, being called all sorts of horrible things. And I've mentioned before, I'll say it again, I now have a mutual friend with Contra, and I know that Contra has very negative feelings towards the wider trans movement, and it has dramatically negatively impacted Contra's health. In fact, okay, I don't know. I was gonna like I found something out via this conversation about how like a specific thing, but I don't know, let's keep it on the down low. But yeah, basically, I mean, I know that Contra would, or I am very confident, let's say, that Contra would actually describe or would not characterize the response that Contra frequently gets from trans activists as polite disagreement, but rather would characterize it as attacking. Whereas I would say, overwhelmingly, having had huge amounts of disagreement from gender critical people, I would always characterize it as disagreement rather than attacking. I mean, I guess barring like a few just like very random individuals, like, just the odd kind of person who just has a, bee in their bonnet.
And as a result, some of us say things that others disagree with, even within the movement. Oh, God, no!
From what I've heard from trans activists, there's a very consistent thread of them being pretty much afraid to express any deviation from a very particular set of claims and beliefs.
Really? Who are they? Now seriously, you brought them up. Tell us who they are and what they were afraid of saying. Anyway, that's all I want to...
Okay, so first of all, it's worth noting, like, I think one of the examples that I brought up, which I find really funny, is the fact that Vorsh, literally in his response to J.K. Rowling's article, was like, hey, there's a huge amount of diversity of thought allowed within the trans activist movement. I mean, just the other day, I was telling ContraPoints how I thought that the whole uwu thing was annoying. And it's like, that kind of shows you, if that's their example of, look at the huge amount of diversity of thought allowed within our movement, it shows you how little diversity of thought is allowed within their movement. But you know who is actually, yes, afraid of TRAs and the response that they could get? ContraPoints. ContraPoints got cancelled just for saying, sometimes I prefer, conservative spaces because I'm less likely to have my pronouns asked. And that got ContraPoints so cancelled. Like, ContraPoints was attacked. Like, there's a reason why ContraPoints hardly tweets. And, to an extent, this is speculative, but it's also 100% correct. I can almost guarantee the reason why ContraPoints is very reluctant to tweet is because the TRA movement, the trans activist movement, is not receptive to hot takes. ContraPoints tweeted a hot take like 4 years ago and got driven into like hiding. Yeah, I mean, it's that simple. Anyway. So yeah, we're kind of done now, which is fun.
Cover. So, final thoughts? Well, to be honest, the most I can give would essentially come down to me screaming into a pillow. Good night and good luck.
Oh, wait, what was that?
Bounce on the squad when it's time to go to war, like George Bush did to the National Guard. Real word like swordplay, vernacular sharp.
That just happened to be what I was listening to before we started. So like, I was like, oh wow, this is like a cool. Let's all get embarrassed at the videos I've been watching. Doug. Okay, another video by this person. Another video by this person. So we got some Doug. Which I will. Oh wait, this is Doug. So yeah, this is, I don't know if you know this guy. He's a Twitch dude. Hey, I had some strawberries today that were very useful. I saw your strawberry post. You asked like how people have been healthy, and I couldn't think of anything. But now I've been for a cycle ride, so there we go, that counts. Yeah, Doug makes good stuff. And then we have Sunny V2, which I must admit, like, I kind of don't like the whole like YouTube commentary thing, but at the same time, like I guess I do get kind of clickbaited into it, I suppose. I don't know what the Breaking Bad thing is. I've got a Drew Gooden video up, and I've got YMS, and a Vsauce thing. There we go. So, who wants to make fun of me? Anyway.
Veterans of American wars, they get home maladjusted with post-traumatic stress syndrome. Peace to my big brother, leave it in a week.
Okay, I don't know like about copyright. If I play it in like tiny portions, are we okay? I'm a bit confused about the copyright thing because there's a guy I know who does Twitch, and literally his Twitch streams consist of playing 2 whole songs in full and then deciding which one he likes most, which seems like a terrible, like, I don't know, like garbage content, but anyway. Okay, wait. Oh, wait. Let me just click on this. Okay, wait. Oh. Yeah. I noticed that we haven't got a chance to test whether or not the super chat works. How unfortunate. Wait, I don't know though. Do I have to like... I'm not sure. I really, you know, I'm not saying that I expect people to give super chats. I'm just saying that I do want to find out if it works. That music is way louder than your speaking voice. Really? I see. You mean this music?
Stay safe in the Middle East, bruh. Get home safely. It's a Southside revival. Put your hands high. Let your arms be the pillars that be holding.
I was not dethroned by this video. Yeah. I mean, overall, like, the video was whatever. I mean, you know, get too fair, you know? Like, I don't have... Like, the thing is, I mean, I guess one of the problems is, like, the central... The super chat works. Hey, we did it. Well done, Lisa. Michelle. A white unicorn with rainbow hair. That sounds like that reminds me of that like a bullet with butterfly wings by Homer Simpson standing politely, smashing pumpkins. Do you think there is any value in holding on to gender as a descriptive term? Well, look, Loris, I could answer that, but what I'd rather do is tell you my opinions about Doctor Who, because you asked that in last stream and then you disappeared because I took ages to respond to it. I love the moon so much. It's out. The moon's out. And it's in my line of vision. It's always there, watching me, watching over me, making sure everything's going to be okay. So, my general perception is that in the past, like, you know, back before the revival, Doctor Who was old and therefore bad. But then, okay, so like when they made like the new version, I was like pretty into it, but like I guess the thing is, you know, obviously I was a kiddywink, and therefore I'm kind of inclined to be like, it's a kid show for kids, you know? Like I enjoyed it when I was a kid, but it's kind of like I just really can't enjoy it as an adult, you know? Like I just can't. I'm sorry, Loris. I just can't enjoy the show as an adult. I think part of it is like it's like scary when you're a kid, but I also think there's other things like kind of the stakes. But there's also another thing, and this is the thing I really need to say. You know, like, and I need to make this clear. I think in general, a lot of TV shows are bad, but especially a TV show like Doctor Who, because like there can never be a sense of finality to it, right? When do you stop watching it? I actually stopped watching it after David Tennant, so between David Tennant and Matt Smith. But yeah, like the way I look at it, it's all like there's nothing they can do that's not at some point going to be undone, right? Like that's kind of the problem. Like it's kind of the problem with it going on forever. I feel like they would have to introduce a rule where it's like, if let's say a creator's run is finished and they haven't retconned something, or like they've done something and they haven't undone it, then the rule is that no one else is allowed to undo it. Yeah, I mean, like the thing is, like I did enjoy it, but like I don't think I could show it to somebody with like the expectation that they would like it, you know? Like I couldn't recommend it as like a great show. I think part of it, like I really do think so. Like I genuinely have this whole thing about how I actually think most TV shows are bad, and there's a few reasons for that. But one of the big things I think is like the lack of finality. Like I can't really recommend Doctor Who for somebody because it's like, okay, you watch it, but it's not building up to anything. Like there's no sense in which it's like there, it's done. It's like No, but yeah, it's like it's just you want like it's never finished. And I can't deal with that because I'm just like, okay, they beat the Daleks. I mean, you know, they'll come back again though. Hi bro, what's up? Hello, Urfan280. You're just in time for me to leave. How are you doing? I'm doing good. Well, sorry. Supernatural. That's a show that I want to watch, but like I'm very like I know I fucking hate how they go on for so long. Yeah. I mean, what's really annoying is when they have a show that has an ending and then they screw it up. Like Game of Thrones, I'm still angry about it because it's like they literally had everything. They had like a coherent story building up to something. There was like an ending. They were like, yes, this is it, season 8, and we're done. And they screwed it up. People are saying they really like Dark. I see. Sounds good. Well, apparently in Supernatural, there's this thing where like actually they end up fighting the devil's brother or something, who's like the super devil. Yeah, like that's thing. It like a lot of like it does just like TV often goes on for so long. Can you check out one suggestion if you don't mind before you leave? If you say it super quick, you got like you got to be quick. Jodie Whittaker was amazing at baking Doctor Who under COVID restrictions. I suppose you must hate soap operas. Yes, although I have seen Desperate Housewives, and it was fine. Go by Coke Studio. Okay, I'm going to type in those words with no idea what it means. Okay, Google, play Go by Coke Studio. Okay. I'm a little bit resistant to playing too much copyrighted stuff. Like I can't play it all the way through. I mean, I don't know. I get confused because I do see a lot of live streamers playing other people's music in their entirety. But in my view, that's just how is that kosher? Oh. I'll kind of like do like listen to it for 10 seconds, then press the 1 button, then listen for 10 seconds, then press the 2 button.
Black eye, blue smile, hyper attack. I can't help it, इंतहा कैसी है जानू कैसे इतना बरस जाता फिर वही है रात सुनहरी I don't wanna shut down just to feel safe I'm pathetic, so frenetically romanticizing but this
I will say that sounds like every single song that's ever been played at like a kind of Indian, like an Indian restaurant. Like you just sat there waiting for your poppadoms, and you just got hello. I'd like the chicken pasanda, with the lamb Rogan Josh, and I'd like some mango kulfi.
Patterns in my delicate scars. Feel it.
I went to an Indian restaurant and there was this white dude who was the waiter, and then he got our order wrong. And I was like, oh god, you know, like the one time there's a white guy, the one time they give a white guy a chance, one time they let a white guy have a chance and he screws it up. When will we finally get white guy Indian restaurant waiter representation? I just realized Loras Tyrell has a name from Game of Thrones. Again. Gore. Okay, play Dynasty Dojo theme of Shadow Fight 3. Oh, sorry, Shadow Fight 3. I want to be like a radio DJ. And coming up, we have Dynasty Dojo theme from Shadow Fight 3 soundtrack. Oh, this is like good music to listen to while looking at the moon. This is good music to do my futashikis to. Oh wait, okay, it got a bit heavier than I was expecting. I'm not gonna lie. Which is fine. It's just not like futashiki music. Violin part. I got some violin there. I am skipping to it a little bit because we actually only have. I was kind of planning on going at 10:30, so we're 3 minutes over anyway. Oh, this is interesting. You know how they have like the most replayed section? So here it is. Okay, this is the most replayed section. Here it is. Ready? Got it. Yeah, got it. You know what, guys? This is making me so hyped. I think it might be time for a like spike. So so everyone get your finger over the like button, and in 3, 2, 1, like spike. Actually, it's not a like intense. I was expecting people like really trying. Okay, here we go. Like spike. It's my girlfriend. Oh, sorry, fiance. Has anyone clocked Hannah and Mikey vlogs? You know what? I want to say this is not representative of what I usually do, but so loud. Michael's playing all the hits. Anyway, I was just about to go. I said that I was going to get off at 10:30, because I'm literally just like camera's like just about to run out of battery. I guarantee it. So I am going to go. But hello, my fiance, and I will talk to you after I leave. I will not do the thing where I call you, even though I did that one time and it was fun, but I'm about to run out of battery. I will say, yeah, again, that response. I will say, though, that I will goodbye to everyone else, and I will see you Monday, maybe? I'm not here Sunday, so see you later in the next stream. Good. All right. Bye. Oh, people are talking about gore. Okay. I thought they were talking about like Al Gore. Bye, 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 bye. Bye, Lisa. Bye, Initial. Bye, Leica. Bye. Okay, that's everyone who said bye so far. So